It started with static. One night, as people across the city settled into the usual hum of their evening routines, a strange sound filtered through one local radio station. It was low, almost a whisper at first, just faint enough to be ignored. But slowly, insidiously, it took hold of any man who tuned in. Mandy was sitting on her sofa with her boyfriend, Mark, enjoying a quiet evening at home. He'd just come back from work, his usual radio show blaring as he entered the door. She hadn't thought much of the crackling static that cut through the music for a brief moment. The way the song seemed off. The melody felt slippery and unnatural, like something pressing on her mind and slipping away just as quickly. But Mark's face lit up with curiosity, turning the dial up as if captivated. "Do you hear that?" he murmured, entranced. His eyes were fixed, dark and unfocused, as the haunting melody played. Mandy shook her head. "It just sounds like static to me." But Mark leaned closer to the speaker, mesmerized. The song ended after a few eerie minutes, and he returned to the couch with a dazed look, chuckling to himself. "Weird song, right?" he said, though his voice sounded strained, distant. Mandy dismissed it as just a strange tune, not worth a second thought. Days passed and more men around the city seemed to change in subtle, disturbing ways. Reports on local news channels whispered about rising violence, men suddenly snapping in public, lashing out with no explanation. Mandy tried not to worry. Surely Mark wouldn't act like that. But something in him was changing, and she could feel it. Mark became withdrawn, spending hours listening to that same radio station, hunting for that one elusive song. His smile grew vacant, his voice losing its warmth, his touch becoming cold, impersonal. She'd wake up at night to find him staring into the dark, muttering to himself. One night, as Mandy lay on the couch, trying to shake off the chill that had settled over her home, she saw him stumble toward her, his eyes wild and glassy. He looked at her without recognition, as if she were a stranger. "Mandy?" he murmured, though it was more like he was testing the name on his tongue. Unfamiliar. Who are you?" Her heart twisted with fear. "Mark, it's me. It's Mandy, your girlfriend." His lips curled into a humorless grin. "I don't know a Mandy," he hissed, before turning and disappearing into the kitchen. She could hear him rummaging through the drawers. The metallic clang of silverware. The low, manic hum of that eerie song on his lips. Mandy's pulse pounded as she crept after him, finding him clutching a knife, his knuckles white. There was something dark, almost predatory in his eyes. "What are you doing with that?" she whispered, forcing her voice to stay steady. He looked up, his head tilted in a way that made her skin crawl. "It's for the music," he said, and for a moment she saw a flicker of the Mark she knew, the Mark she loved. "It's in my head. It's telling me what to do." His voice dropped to a whimper, almost like he was pleading with her. I can't stop it, Mandy." The radio in the living room crackled to life, filling the silence with that haunting melody once more, louder, more insistent. Mark twitched, his face contorting with each beat. He squeezed his eyes shut, as if trying to fight off some invisible force. But when he opened them again, the person she knew was gone. He lunged. Mandy darted back, barely dodging the blade as it slashed through the air where she'd just been standing. She stumbled, the world spinning, trying to keep her wits about her. But Mark was fast, faster than she'd ever seen him, his movements jerky and erratic like he was a marionette controlled by invisible strings. "Mark, please!" she screamed, tears blurring her vision. "Snap out of it. I know you're still in there." He only laughed, a deep guttural sound that sent chills down her spine. He cornered her in the hallway, his breathing ragged, the knife trembling in his hand as he raised it, his smile widening into something twisted, unnatural. And then his eyes flickered. Just for a second, the Mark she knew was back. Mandy. He whispered, his voice shaking. "Help me." With trembling hands, Mandy grabbed a nearby vase and, with all her strength, brought it down on his head. Mark collapsed, his body crumpling to the ground in a heap, the knife clattering from his hand. She stood there, gasping, her heart racing, looking down at the man she loved, his face frozen in that disturbing smile. She wanted to believe he'd wake up, that he'd be okay, that this was all just a nightmare. But deep down, she knew Mark wasn't coming back. A week later, the entire city was in lockdown. Men across town had fallen prey to the song, their minds twisted beyond recognition, each transformed into a ticking time bomb of manic energy. The government was scrambling, trying to find the origin of the frequency, but all leads turned up empty. Scientists were baffled. Psychologists were stumped. They'd never seen anything like it. Mandy sat alone in her apartment, haunted by the memories of Mark. His laughter, the warmth in his eyes, the way he used to hold her when she was scared. And now, nothing but silence. She'd had to bury him herself in the quiet woods outside town, hoping he could find peace away from the haunting melody that had taken him from her. But even in death, his ghost lingered. Every night, she'd wake to the sound of the song echoing in her mind, playing on a loop, taunting her, reminding her of the life she'd lost. She knew it was only a matter of time before the song started affecting everyone, not just the men. One evening, the radio crackled on its own, though she hadn't touched it. She froze, staring at it, as that familiar static filled the room. "Mandy," the voice rasped through the speakers, chilling her to the bone. She trembled, staring at the radio, half believing she was going mad. But the voice repeated, more insistent this time. "Mandy, join him. He's waiting." The song started again, louder this time, the haunting melody creeping into every corner of her mind, filling her with dread. She fell to her knees, hands over her ears, trying to block it out, but it was useless. It was inside her, winding its way through her memories, whispering, seducing, tempting her to give in. The last thing she heard before the song faded was Mark's voice, distant and hollow, calling her name. "Join me, Mandy." And then silence. Mandy never heard the song again, but every night she could feel it pulsing just beyond her grasp, lingering in the dark, waiting for the day she would turn the radio on and finally let it in.